A wild red Mustang keeps showing up at a broken man's gate. She's thin, scarred, and she won't stop coming back. Somewhere in those mountains, someone let her go. Someone who sleeps with a knife, hasn't spoken to another soul in 6 years, and is running from a man powerful enough to bury the truth under dirt and bone. When a monsoon rips open the earth and reveals what's been hidden beneath it, nothing in this valley will ever be the same. This story reminds us that healing doesn't come from being saved. It comes from being given the space to save yourself. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fight. It's stay and let someone choose to walk through the gate on their own. You're listening to Cowboy Dusk, where the sun sets slow and the stories cut deep. This channel is home to tales of the wild frontier, love forged in dust and drought, the unbreakable bond between wounded souls, and the quiet courage it takes to protect someone the world forgot. If your heart belongs to the West, you're in the right place. If this story stirred something in you, hit that like button and drop a comment. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience.
Tuesday morning, the red Mustang was standing at the gate again. Ethan Calloway set his coffee on the porch rail and watched her through the early light. She was thin, thinner than the last time, if that was possible. Her mane hung in tangles that caught the dust, and across her left shoulder ran a scar long enough to trace with a finger, the kind that comes from barbed wire or a blade, hard to say which. She stood at the gate the way a dog stands at a door it remembers being let through once, patient, certain, waiting for something the rest of the world had forgotten to give her. 4th time in 2 weeks. Ethan lifted his coffee and drank. The brew was bitter and half cold, the way it always was when he made it himself, which was every morning now and had been every morning for 4 years. Ruth used to make the coffee. Ruth used to do a lot of things that nobody did anymore, and the absence of those things had settled into the bones of this ranch the way dust settles into wood grain. You stop noticing it. Then one morning you run your hand across the table and your fingers come up gray, and you remember that somebody used to wipe it clean. He looked past the Mustang toward the Catalina Mountains. They rose in the distance like the spine of something enormous and dead, pale rock and scrub brush and shadow. July in the Arizona Territory, 1887. The monsoon was supposed to come, but had not. The sky stayed white and mean, and the heat did not sit on the land so much as press down on it, the way a boot presses down on a throat. The saguaros had started to shrink. Ethan had seen it before in the drought of '84, the way the tall cactus pulled their ribs in tight like a man sucking in his gut. It meant the ground had nothing left to give. Neither did the ranch. 400 acres, 80 head of cattle remaining from 200. One ranch hand, an old man named Holt, who moved like his knees, had filed a formal complaint against the rest of his body. And a banknote sitting on the kitchen table, folded once, with a number on it that Ethan tried not to look at too often. Due October 1st, 8 weeks. The number was not large by the standards of men who lived in cities and wore suits and had opinions about cattle they had never touched. But out here, where a man measured wealth in water and grass and the stubbornness to keep waking up, the number on that paper was a death sentence written in ink. Ethan set the coffee down and walked toward the gate. The Mustang watched him come. She did not run. Not yet. She let him get within 20 feet, close enough that he could see her ribs beneath the red hide, close enough to see the dried blood on her shoulder where the scar met something fresher. Then she turned and trotted off the way she always did, south toward the foothills, her hooves striking the hard-packed dirt in a rhythm that Ethan had started hearing in his sleep. Holt appeared on the porch. He was 58 years old and built like a piece of jerky that God had decided to give opinions. He had fought at Shiloh and never talked about it, except when he was talking about everything else, because the war was in every sentence, Holt said, whether he meant it to be or not. "That horse has a person," Holt said. Ethan watched the Mustang disappear into the brush. "I know." She knows gate posts. She knows fencing. Horse like that, half wild, she would not come back to a gate 4 times in 2 weeks unless somebody taught her that gates are where people are. Somebody brought her close to here once, then let her go, or she got loose. Holt shook his head. Loose horses run. That one returns. There is a difference. Ethan came back to the porch and picked up his coffee. The wind shifted, and for a moment he caught the smell of creosote bloom, that sharp, clean scent that came after a hot gust, the smell of the desert trying to convince you it was still alive. Somewhere out past the South Wash, a coyote started up, and then another answered, and then the two of them went back and forth for a while, having the same conversation they had every dawn about territory and hunger and the things that move in the dark. The silence after the coyotes stopped was worse, because the silence was where Ruth used to be. Not the big things, not her laugh or her voice or the way she looked at him when he said something she thought was stupid, which was often the small thing, the one specific sound he could not replace. Ruth asking from the kitchen doorway whether he had locked the gate. He had not missed a wife in 4 years. He had missed that question every single night. "You hear the talk in town," Holt said. "What talk?" "Wild woman in the mountains. Somebody saw smoke up near the North Ridge. Billy Prescott says he lost 3 chickens, claims she took them. Sheriff Bragg told him it was coyotes." Bragg would say that. Bragg would say whatever Crane tells him to say. That is a separate problem. Ethan looked at the mountains again. Whoever was up there, whoever owned that horse, they were close. Close enough that the Mustang could reach his gate and return before dark. Close enough that the smoke Billy Prescott saw was not imagination. Close enough that if Silas Crane was paying attention, and Crane always paid attention, it was only a matter of time before that person stopped being a rumor and became a problem. Ethan drained his coffee. "Let me know if the horse comes back." Holt said nothing. He had the look he got when he knew something was about to go wrong and had decided to let it happen, because Ethan was going to do what Ethan was going to do, regardless. That night, Ethan sat on the porch in the dark and looked through the kitchen window at the whiskey bottle on the shelf. It sat between a tin of coffee and a jar of dried beans, catching the lamplight in a way that made the amber liquid glow like something holy. He had put it there the day he stopped drinking, 6 months after the boy. The 19-year-old boy whose name he never learned and whose face he saw every time he closed his eyes in a dark room. He kept the bottle because Ruth would have told him that a man who hides his weakness from himself is not strong. He is just a liar with good hiding places. He did not drink. He looked. That was the deal he had made with himself, and most nights it held. The wind came down off the mountains carrying the cold that people who had never lived in the desert did not believe existed. Cold enough that the water in the horse trough would have a skin of ice by morning. Cold enough that he could see his breath. The stars were thick and close, the way they got when there was no moisture in the air to blur them. And the Milky Way ran across the sky like a road that led somewhere better than here. Ethan thought about the Mustang, about the blood on her back, about what Holt had said. Somebody brought her close, then let her go. He thought about what kind of person lives alone in the Catalina Mountains in July. What kind of person owns a horse but does not tie it? What kind of person lets the one thing that connects them to the world walk away again and again and trusts it to come back? He did not have an answer, but he was starting to understand the question. He went to bed and dreamed of Ruth, the way he always did, standing in the kitchen doorway asking if he locked the gate. In the dream, he always said yes. In life, the night she died, the gate had been open. That did not have anything to do with the typhoid. But it had everything to do with the guilt, and guilt does not care about logic. Guilt only cares about the door you left unlocked and the person who was gone when you came home. Wednesday morning, the horse was at the gate again. This time there was blood on her back. Ethan followed the blood trail uphill for 4 hours before the smell found her, before his eyes did. Dried blood, dead campfire ash, and something wilder than both. the smell of a human being who had forgotten how to live near other human beings. It was not filth, not exactly. It was absence, the absence of soap, of cooked food, of the thousand small scents that civilization leaves on a body. What remained was animal and honest and older than language. The Catalina foothills in July were not a place for the unprepared. Pink granite shattered by centuries of sun, sharp enough to cut leather. Cholla cactus catching the late light until it seemed to glow from the inside, golden and treacherous because cholla did not warn you before it put its needles through your skin. Dry washes cut into the earth like old scars, full of javelina tracks and the papery husks of dead beetles. Sound carried differently up here. You could hear a horse shift its weight from half a mile away. You could hear your own heartbeat if you stood still long enough. Ethan knew this country. Ruth and he had ridden up here the first year of their marriage, when the land was new to them, and everything about Arizona felt like a dare. She had loved the way the light changed on the rocks in late afternoon, the way the shadows turned purple and the air went from white-hot to almost cool in the space of 20 minutes. He had not ridden up here since she died. The blood trail led along a wash, up a ridge of loose shale, and then around a shoulder of rock to an overhang. Not a cave. A shelf of stone jutting out from the hillside, deep enough to provide shade, shallow enough that you could see anyone coming from 100 yards. She was lying beneath it. The woman was on her side, knees drawn up, left leg extended at an angle that said something was very wrong with it. A knife was in her right hand, loosely held, but held nonetheless. Her clothing was not what he expected, not rags, not the remnants of a dress worn past its lifespan. Leather. Handmade, rough, stitched with sinew. A vest, leggings, moccasins that looked like they had been made from a deer hide. She had built her own clothes. That single detail told Ethan more about the past 6 years of this woman's life than any words could have. Her face was sharp, cheekbones prominent, jaw set even in semi-consciousness, dark hair cut short and uneven, probably with the knife she was still holding. Her skin was brown from sun, not from birth. The deep, permanent tan of someone who had lived outdoors for years. She was young, younger than he expected. Maybe 24, 25, and she was burning with fever. He could see the leg now. Left calf, swollen to twice its size, the skin around the wound gone dark with the purple red of infection. 2 puncture marks, close together. Rattlesnake. She had already treated it. He could see the cuts she had made to draw venom, the leather strip tied above the wound as a tourniquet. She had done everything right. But right is not always enough when you're alone in the mountains, and the nearest doctor is a 2-day ride, and the venom has had time to work. Ethan stopped 15 feet away. She had not moved, but something about her breathing changed. Quicker, shallower. She was awake, or close to it, and she knew he was there. He did not step closer. He set his canteen on the ground, then he backed up 10 paces and sat down on a rock. "Water is there," he said. "I am here. You decide." Nothing happened for a long time. A hawk circled overhead riding a thermal. The shadows shifted. Ethan waited. He was good at waiting, a skill learned from cattle, from drought, from the slow passage of grief that does not care about your schedule. Then she opened her eyes. They were green, not the soft green of eastern forests that Ethan had seen in paintings. The green of copper after rain, bright and hard and full of something that was not quite anger and not quite fear. It was closer to calculation. She was measuring him the way a cornered animal measures the distance to the door. She looked at the canteen, looked at him, looked at the canteen again. Ethan did not move. He did not smile. He did not do any of the things that a man does when he is trying to appear harmless, because appearing harmless is its own kind of lie. And this woman, whoever she was, had a nose for lies the way a bloodhound has a nose for fugitives. She reached for the canteen. Her hand shook. She drank, long and deep, water running down her chin, and she watched him over the rim of it the entire time. She did not close her eyes. She did not lower the knife. That was not trust. That was arithmetic. Die alone on the mountain or owe a stranger. She chose the debt. She could always settle it later, one way or another. "Your leg needs treatment," Ethan said. "I have a man at my ranch who is a field medic. He can help." She spoke for the first time. Her voice was rough, not from illness, but from disuse. A voice that had spent years talking only to a horse and to itself. Where? South. 2 hours' ride. My ranch. Whose land? Mine. Whose territory? That question was different. Whose territory did not mean who held the deed. It meant who held the power. Ethan understood the distinction, and the fact that she made it told him she had learned it the hard way. "Callaway land," he said. "My name is Ethan Callaway. I have been here since '68. The land is mine, clear title, no disputes." That was not entirely true. Crane had tried to claim his east pasture 2 years back, and the matter was settled only because Ethan had spent money he did not have on a lawyer in Tucson. But the woman did not need that history. Not yet. She tried to stand, could not. Tried again. The leg buckled. Ethan moved without thinking, stepped forward with his hand out, and she swung the knife. It missed his forearm by an inch, not because she was weak, because she chose to miss. The distinction mattered. "Do not," she said, "touch me." Ethan stepped back. His heart was hammering, but he kept his voice level. "All right. Can you get to the horse on your own?" She could. It took her 5 minutes and every ounce of will she had, dragging herself across the ground, pulling up on the rock face, standing on one leg with her teeth clenched so hard he could see the muscles in her jaw jumping. She got to his horse and hauled herself up into the saddle without his help, without looking at him, without making a sound. She still held the knife. Ethan took the reins and led the horse down the mountain. It took 2 hours. She was nearly unconscious for the last 30 minutes, swaying in the saddle, but her hand never opened. The knife stayed. He noticed in the failing light how light she was, how the bones of her shoulders pressed against the leather vest like something trying to break through, how her wrists were narrow enough that the scars circling them, old scars, the kind that come from metal, were visible even in the shadows. He did not ask about the scars. Not then. When Holt saw Ethan carry a wild woman through the ranch gate, he did not ask who she was. He looked at her, looked at Ethan, looked at the mountains behind them, and asked the only question that mattered. Does Crane know yet? And Ethan understood, in the way Holt said it, in the weight of those 4 words, that he had stepped into something far larger than a snakebite. Savannah woke up under a ceiling. She had not been under a ceiling in 6 years. First instinct, find the exit. Window to the left, small but wide enough to fit through. Bedroom door straight ahead, not locked from the outside. Knife still on her hip. She ran her hand along her waist and felt the bone handle, and the relief that came with it was so sharp it almost hurt. Someone had not taken her knife. That was the only reason she stayed another 5 minutes. She lay on the floor. Not the bed. The bed was there, a narrow iron frame with a wool blanket folded on it. But she had not slept in a bed since she was 18 years old, and the idea of lying in one now, in a stranger's house, in a room with a door she had not locked herself, made her chest tighten the way it tightened in the canyon when they put the grate over the pit, and the sky became a grid of iron bars. She had rolled off the bed in the night, or she had never been on it. Someone had put her there, and she had gotten herself off, probably before she was fully awake, probably on instinct, the way a horse rolls away from a rattlesnake before its brain catches up with its body. The floor was pine, rough cut, gaps between the boards, dust in the gaps. It smelled like wood and old soap, and something else, something she could not place at first, and then she could. A woman. Not recently, not strongly. But there, like a stain that hot water cannot fully lift. Whoever this man was, a woman had lived in this house, and the woman was gone. Savannah sat up, her left leg screamed. She looked down. The wound had been cleaned and redressed with proper bandaging, not the strips of leather she had used on the mountain. Someone had applied a poultice, something that smelled of sage and clay. Someone had done this while she was unconscious, and the thought of hands on her body while she slept sent a bolt of cold fury through her so violent that she nearly vomited. Then she looked closer. The bandaging was tight, but not too tight, placed with precision. The hand that did this was not the hand of the rancher who had found her. It was the hand of someone who had wrapped wounds before, many times, under worse conditions than a ranch house bedroom. She stood on one leg, used the wall for support, and made it to the window. Outside, the ranch spread before her in the early light. A main house, low and solid, built from adobe and timber. A barn, large, with a corral attached where 8 horses stood in various states of mourning. A bunkhouse off to the right, small, one room. Beyond the buildings, the land opened up in every direction, brown and gold and flat, running to the mountains in the east and the mesa line in the west. 80 head of cattle, maybe fewer, scattered across the south pasture. Not enough. She knew cattle the way she knew horses, the way she knew weather and water, and the sound a man makes when he is lying. And that pasture should have had 3 times the head to justify the acreage. This ranch was dying. She could see it the way a doctor sees illness in the color of a man's skin. The fences needed repair. The water tank in the near pasture was low, green at the edges. The barn needed new roof planks. Everything was one season away from falling apart, held together by stubbornness and not enough money. She filed that away. Information was survival. It had always been survival. A knock on the door. She grabbed her knife. "Miss?" A voice, old, dry, careful. "I brought water and food. I am leaving it outside the door. I will be on the porch when you are ready." Footsteps retreating. She waited, counted to 60, opened the door. A tray on the floor. A plate of biscuits, 4 of them. A strip of jerked beef. A cup of water and a cup of coffee. She looked at the food, counted the biscuits, counted the beef strips, calculated how long they would last if she ate only half now and saved the rest. That was a canyon habit, where food was not given but rationed, where every meal was a transaction and hunger was a tool of control. You learn to count. You learn to hide. You learn to eat fast and quiet and to never ever trust that more was coming. She ate 2 biscuits, wrapped the rest in the cloth napkin and put them under the bed. Then she went to the porch. The old man was sitting in a chair with his legs crossed and a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked at her the way you look at a horse you are not sure about, with interest and distance and the patience of a man who has learned that some things cannot be rushed. "I am Holt," he said. "I dressed your leg last night. Field medic, Shiloh, 62. I have seen worse than a snake bite, but not much worse, so you should probably stay off it for a week." Savannah sat on the porch step. Not in the other chair. Not beside him. On the step, where she could see the yard and the gate and every direction someone might come from. "Where is he?" she said. "South pasture. Moving what is left of the herd to higher ground before the monsoon, if it comes." She looked at the empty pasture. "He is losing this place." Holt drank his coffee. "That is his business. He paid for a doctor for a stranger. That is either generosity or stupidity." Holt almost smiled. With Ethan, it is usually both. She was quiet for a while. The sun came up over the mountains and the light changed the way it does in the desert, from gray to gold to white in the space of minutes. A roadrunner darted across the yard, stopped, looked at her with one bright eye, and then vanished into the brush. She had not seen a roadrunner up close in a long time. In the mountains, they stayed lower. Down here, they were bold. She envied them. "He has a banknote due," she said. It was not a question. She had seen the letter on the kitchen table when they carried her through. "October," Holt said. He did not ask how she knew. 8 weeks, and he is down to 80 head, closer to 75 after last week. He cannot make the note on 75 head. Number. So he will lose the ranch, unless something changes, yes. Savannah looked at the mountains. The Catalinas were catching the morning light, turning pink at the peaks the way they did every dawn, and for a moment they looked like something from a painting, something beautiful and remote and untouchable. She had lived up there for 6 years. She had known every trail, every water source, every den and hollow and overhang. She had built a life up there out of nothing, out of leather and stone and the determination not to die. And now she was down here, under a ceiling, on a porch, with a banknote and a dying ranch, and a man she did not know who had carried her through his gate without asking what she was running from. The knife was still on her hip. The mountains were still there. She could leave. She thought about that. She thought about it every 5 minutes for the next 3 days. Ethan returned that evening, smelling of dust and cattle, and the particular exhaustion of a man trying to hold water in his hands. He found her on the porch. He brought a plate of food and set it on the step beside her, not too close, and sat in the chair Holt had been using. "How is the leg?" he said. "Still attached. Holt says you need a week off it. Holt is probably right. I will give it 3 days." Ethan looked at her. She did not look back. She was watching the gate, the way she watched everything, with the steady attention of someone who has learned that the world sends warnings before it sends danger, and the warnings are usually quiet. He came back the next morning with another plate. She had not eaten the dinner. She had wrapped it in cloth and stored it under the porch step. He saw it, but did not mention it. He left the breakfast plate and went to work. On the second day, he brought a blanket. She had not asked for one. The nights were cold, colder than people from the east believed, and she had been sleeping on the porch floor with nothing but her leather vest. He set the blanket beside her and said, "Gets cold at night." She looked at the blanket, then at him, then at the blanket again. "I did not ask for that," she said. "I know. Then why bring it? Because it is cold, and you are sleeping on pine boards." She studied him, the way she studied everything, looking for the contract, the hidden clause, the place where the words split open and the real intention crawled out. "I am not the stray dog you brought home so Ruth can look down from heaven and be proud of you." The words hit him like a slap. She saw it. The way his face changed, the way his hands went still on the porch rail, the way his eyes went somewhere far away and came back hard. She had found the wound and pressed on it, because pressing on wounds was how she had survived the canyon. Find what hurts, push, watch what happens. Let the reaction tell you who the person really is. Ethan said nothing. He picked up the blanket. He walked inside. She heard him put it on the table. She heard him sit down. She heard the silence that follows when a person has been told the truth about themselves and does not know what to do with it. That night, Holt found Ethan in the kitchen, looking at the whiskey bottle on the shelf. Not drinking, just looking, but looking longer than usual. "She is right," Holt said, "and you know it. That is why you are angry." Ethan did not answer. "You brought her here because she needed help. That is true. But you also brought her here because helping someone makes the house feel less empty. And that is also true. Both things can be true, and neither one cancels the other." Ethan looked at the old man. "When did you get wise?" "Shiloh. A man gets wise or he gets dead." "I chose wise." It was close. The next morning, Savannah was changing her bandage on the porch. She had unwound the dressing Holt had applied and was cleaning the wound herself, her teeth clenched, her hands steady despite the pain. Ethan came out and saw the wound, saw the infection still there, the red streaking up toward her knee. "Let me help with that," he said, and before she could answer, he was kneeling beside her, reaching for the bandage. He pulled the dressing off wrong. The cloth stuck to the wound and tore at the new skin forming beneath it. Savannah hissed through her teeth, a sharp intake of breath that she cut off before it became a sound, because she had learned in the canyon that making sounds meant making yourself a target. "Get off," she said. "I know my own leg." Ethan pulled back. He looked at his hands. He looked at the blood on the dressing he had just made worse. And something clicked into place behind his eyes, the slow, terrible recognition of a man who has just realized that his help was not help. It was control. It was the need to be needed dressed up in the clothing of kindness. He stood up. He said, "I am sorry," and he walked away. And from that morning forward, he did not bring blankets or food or help, unless she asked for it first. He started asking, "Do you need? Would you like? Can I?" small words. But the shift behind them was enormous. On the third day, Roja came back. Savannah was strong enough to walk to the gate, slowly, leaning on a stick Holt had cut for her. The red Mustang was there, standing in the early light, mane still tangled, still thin, still carrying that scar on her shoulder. But she was there. She had come back again. Savannah reached the gate, and the horse came to her. Not the way a pet comes, not eager and wagging. The way a partner comes, steady, certain, closing the distance with the calm of a creature that has decided something and will not be talked out of it. Savannah put her hands on the horse's face and spoke to her, and the sounds that came out were not English and not any language Ethan had heard. They were clicks and breath and low sounds from the back of the throat, a private dialect built over 6 years of shared survival. A language invented by a woman and a horse who had no one else to talk to. Ethan watched from the porch. He had never seen Savannah like this. Soft, that was the word. Not weak, not vulnerable, soft the way water is soft, the way it shapes itself around the thing it touches without losing any of its force. She pressed her forehead against the horse's forehead and closed her eyes. And for a moment, the woman who slept with a knife and counted biscuits and pressed on wounds to test people's character was gone. And in her place was someone Ethan could almost recognize. Someone who loved one living thing so completely that the rest of the world fell away. Then Holt appeared beside him. "Come look at this," Holt said. They walked to where Roja stood. Holt pointed at the scar on the horse's shoulder. Savannah was on the other side of the horse, murmuring, her back to them. "That is not an animal bite," Holt said quietly. "That is a bullet graze. Somebody shot this horse, and not long ago. A week, maybe 2. The wound is still closing." Ethan looked at the graze. Holt was right. He had seen enough bullet wounds on cattle and horses, and once on a 19-year-old boy, to know the difference between teeth and lead. Savannah came around the horse. She saw them looking. She saw where they were looking. And her face, the face that had been soft and open for the first time since she arrived, closed like an iron door slamming shut. She looked at the bullet wound on Roja. She looked at Ethan. Her eyes were not soft anymore. They were the green of copper after rain, and they were full of something older than anger. "You want to know who I am?" she said. She did not look at him when she said it. She looked at the mountains. "Ask Silas Crane. But be ready for the answer you do not want to hear." Ethan rode into Red Spur for medicine and noticed 2 things. The drugstore had doubled its prices since Crane bought it last spring. And everyone in town looked at him the way people look at a man walking toward a cliff who does not know the edge is there. Red Spur was not much of a town. One main street, unpaved, lined with buildings that had been thrown up in the copper boom of '79 and never improved since. A saloon called the Desert Rose that had neither deserts depicted nor roses displayed anywhere on the premises. A general store that smelled of lard and leather, and the particular despair of a merchant who extended too much credit to people who would never pay. A church, white-clappered, small, attended by everyone on Sunday and believed by no one on Monday. A sheriff's office with a sign above the door that said Law and Order in letters that were peeling, which felt appropriate. Hitching posts lined the street. Horses stood in the heat with their heads down, tails flicking at flies. A dog slept in the shade of the water trough and did not move when Ethan rode past. The piano in the Desert Rose was going, badly, the way it always was. Someone playing the same 3 songs in rotation, because those were the only 3 the piano player knew, and 2 of them were the same song in different keys. Ethan tied his horse and went to the drugstore. He bought bandaging, iodine tincture, and a tin of carbolic salve, and the clerk charged him 3 times what the same supplies had cost a year ago. He did not argue. Arguing with Crane's people was like arguing with weather. It changed nothing, and it told them you were paying attention, which was information they would sell. He was coming out of the drugstore when Deputy Abel Fuentes appeared at his elbow. Fuentes was 28, lean, dark-eyed, with a mustache that was trying very hard to be impressive and not quite getting there. He wore his badge the way some men wear a wound, visible and unhealed. He was a good deputy in a bad system, which is the loneliest kind of good there is. "Calloway," Fuentes said. "Buy you a drink." It was 10 in the morning. But this was the Desert Rose, where time was a suggestion, and sobriety was a personal choice that the management did not encourage. They sat in a back corner. Fuentes ordered 2 beers and waited until the barkeep was out of earshot. "Crane knows," Fuentes said. Ethan drank his beer. "Knows what? That you have someone at your ranch. Someone from the mountains. He does not know who yet, but he knows. How?" Fuentes shrugged. "Crane has eyes everywhere. A hand from the Miller Ranch saw you riding out of the foothills with a woman on your horse. Word travels. In this territory, word travels faster than a horse, and it never gets tired." Ethan set his beer down. "What does Crane want with her?" Fuentes looked at his badge, then at the table, then at a spot on the wall that seemed to hold no particular interest but allowed him to avoid Ethan's eyes. "Crane does not care about some wild woman living in the mountains," Fuentes said. "Crane cares about who that person used to belong to. There are places in this territory where my badge means nothing. The canyon is one of them. Devil's Canyon. I did not say that name. And neither did you." They sat in silence. The piano player started the third song, which was the first song again. "If you know what is happening in that canyon," Ethan said, "and you carry that badge, then why has nothing been done?" Fuentes looked at him directly. "Because Sheriff Bragg carries a badge too, and Bragg answers to Crane, and I answer to Bragg, and the territorial marshal in Tucson answers to paperwork, and paperwork requires evidence, and evidence requires someone willing to testify, and the people who could testify are either in the canyon or in the ground. That is how it works, Calloway. Not because the law is broken, because the law is a tool, and tools serve whoever holds them." Ethan finished his beer and left the money on the table. He rode out of Red Spur on the East Road, the one that passed along the edge of Crane's property. He did not intend to stop. But Crane was there, not in a carriage, not on the main road. Silas Crane was mending his own fence line with his own hands, 50 yards off the road, shirt sleeves rolled up, hat pushed back, pliers in his fist. He looked up when Ethan rode past and raised a hand. "Calloway, come take some water. Hot one today." Ethan could have ridden on, should have. But there is a code in the territory that says when a neighbor offers water, you take it, because the day you refuse is the day the territory stops being a place where men can live. He dismounted and walked to the fence. Crane was 55 years old. He did not look it. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with hands that belonged to a man who worked, not a man who hired work done. His face was weathered dark, seamed with lines that ran deep around the eyes and mouth, and his eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky, clear and cold and very, very patient. He wore no silver watch chain, no polished boots. He wore the same work clothes every other rancher in the territory wore, and his boots were dusty, and his hat was sweat-stained, and if you did not know who he was, you would have taken him for a foreman, not an empire. That was the dangerous thing about Silas Crane. He looked like one of them. He talked like one of them. He mended his own fence and offered water and made conversation about drought and cattle prices the way every rancher did at every gate and every fence line in the territory. And you had to remind yourself constantly that this man owned 12,000 acres and controlled the main water source, and that people who crossed him had a habit of becoming very quiet, very quickly. "Dry spell holding," Crane said. He handed Ethan a canteen. "Monsoon is late this year." "It will come," Ethan said. "Always does. Question is whether it comes in time. I have seen ranches go under waiting for rain that was a week late. Timing is everything out here." They talked. Drought. The price of beef in Tucson. Whether the railroad would extend a spur line south. Normal talk, neighbor talk. And then, easily, the way a man slides a knife between ribs, Crane said it. "Here you have company out at your place. Need anything, just say the word. Neighbors help neighbors, Calloway. His voice was completely ordinary. That was what made it terrifying. Ethan realized Crane was not threatening him. Crane was appraising him. The way a man appraises a fence, he is deciding whether to go through or around. Ethan said nothing. Crane did not seem to expect an answer. He picked up his pliers and turned back to the fence, and then stopped. Looked at the mountains. Said something that Ethan was not expecting and would not forget. My father died underground when I was 11. Cave-in at the Bisbee copper mine, 300 feet down. They never got the body out. I used to dream about him down there in the dark with the rock on top of him. I swore I would never let the earth swallow me. He paused. Strange thing is, all I have done since is dig. Different kind of digging, but digging all the same. Then he picked up his pliers and went back to mending fence, like he had said nothing at all. Like the most human thing Ethan had ever heard him say was no more important than the weather. Ethan rode home. The words sat in him like a stone in a boot, because the man was both a monster and a person, and that was harder to fight than a monster alone. A monster you can hate purely. A person you have to understand first, and understanding takes the edge off the hate. And in a fight with Silas Crane, you needed every edge you had. At the saloon earlier, before Fuentes found him, Ethan had overheard two men talking at the bar. Old-timers, the kind who knew everything that happened in the territory, and most of what happened in the surrounding territories, and a fair amount of what God was planning to do next. Crane sent his girl off to school in San Francisco, one of them said. People say he dotes on her something fierce. Only thing that man has got that money did not buy. The other man snorted. What is her name? Ellie. Eliza. Something. Eliza, the first man said. Pretty thing. Smart. Too smart for this territory, which is probably why he sent her away. Ethan had not thought about it then. He filed it now. He reached the ranch near sundown. Savannah was in the horse corral. She was standing on one leg, the injured one held off the ground, and she was mending the top rail of the fence with a hammer and nails she had found somewhere. Her face was tight with pain, and her hands were steady, and she worked with the focused intensity of a person who would rather suffer doing something than sit still doing nothing. Ethan dismounted. He looked at her. He looked at the leg she was not standing on. You are going to lose that leg, he said. I am going to lose my mind if I sit still one more day. It was not a dismissal. It was not her pushing him away. It was two stubborn people meeting at the exact point where their stubbornness overlapped, and the collision was real and almost physical. He was angry because she was hurting herself. She was angry because he was trying to control her healing. Both of them were right. Neither of them could see it. They argued, not loudly, not dramatically. The quiet, tight-jawed argument of two people who are too proud to yell and too angry to stop. It went nowhere. He walked to the house. She went back to the fence. The hammer strokes were louder after that. That night, Ethan woke to a sound in the barn. Not Savannah. She was asleep in the loft, which is where she had been sleeping since she refused the bedroom. He knew because he had checked quietly an hour ago. Holt would have called that controlling. Holt would have been right. But Ethan checked anyway because the habit of watching over people who did not want to be watched over was the deepest part of his damage, and he was not done unlearning it. The sound was hooves, and then the creak of a gate, and then silence. By the time Ethan reached the barn, Roja was gone. The gate to her stall was open. The reins Savannah had hung on the post were cut clean through. On the gate post, a note, pinned with a nail, written in a hand that was careful and literate and patient. Return what belongs to me. Ethan looked at the note. He looked at the barn loft where Savannah was sleeping. He looked at the cut reins. And then he understood something that made his stomach drop. Whoever had done this had been in the barn, had been feet from where Savannah slept, could have taken her, could have done anything, and had chosen deliberately to only take the horse. That was not mercy. That was patience. And patience in a predator was the most dangerous thing there was, because a predator who is patient is a predator who is certain. Certain he will get what he wants. Certain it is only a matter of time. Certain enough to walk into your barn, stand over the woman he has come for, and leave her there because he knows she is not going anywhere he cannot follow. Ethan stood in the dark barn, holding the note and listening to Savannah breathe above him, slow and even, the breathing of a woman who had survived 6 years alone in the mountains and still could not sleep through the night without a knife in her hand. He did not wake her. He did not tell her about the note. Not yet. He went back to the porch and sat in the dark and looked at the mountains and thought about what kind of man leaves a note instead of making a move. The kind who wants you to know he was there. The kind who wants you to understand that the walls you have built are not walls to him. The kind who has done this before many times and knows that fear is a slower weapon than force, but a surer one. Ethan did not sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees and waited for dawn. Savannah knew Roja would come back. Roja always came back. That was the nature of the bond between them, forged over 6 years of shared hunger and shared cold and shared silence in the mountains where no one else would live. The horse came back because the horse knew that Savannah was the only human being in the world who understood her, and understanding in the desert is worth more than water. The problem was not the horse. The problem was that next time, the thing taken would not be a horse. Ethan showed her the note at breakfast. He handed it to her without a word and watched her read it. Her face did not change. That was how he knew it was bad. When Savannah's face did not change, it meant the thing she was looking at was so familiar, so expected, so deeply woven into the fabric of her worst experiences that it did not even register as new. It was just the world being what the world had always been. "Crane," she said. "You know him." She set the note down on the table. She set it down carefully, the way you set down something that might explode. Then she picked up her coffee and drank, and her hands were steady, and her eyes were already somewhere else. Already calculating. Already running the numbers on a problem she had been running numbers on for 8 years. "I will tell you what I can," she said. "Not all of it. Some of it I will not tell you. Not because I do not trust you, because some of it does not belong in words, and I will not put it there for you or anyone." He nodded. They went to work. That was important. She did not sit down and tell the story. She told it while they mended the fence along the east pasture, working side by side, and the physical labor gave her somewhere to put the energy that the telling released. Every sentence came between hammer strokes or the pull of wire or the shove of a post into hard ground. "My father was Thomas Reed," she said. "He had 160 acres east of here, horse ranch. Small, but the water was good. Best spring water in the valley." She paused. She drove a nail. Crane wanted the water. "My father would not sell. He was stubborn that way. Said the water was not his to sell, that it belonged to the land, and the land belonged to the horses, and the horses were not interested in Crane's money." She almost smiled. Almost. "He died when I was 16. Riding accident. That is what they said. Horse threw him on the North Trail, landed on his head. By the time they found him, he was gone." She pulled a length of wire taut. Her arms were strong, stronger than her frame suggested, the strength of 6 years of surviving alone. "Horses did not throw my father. My father was born on a horse. He could ride anything with 4 legs, and most things with 2. You think Crane killed him. I think my father refused to sell his water to a man who does not hear the word no, and then my father had a riding accident. You can draw your own line between those 2 points." She was quiet for a while. They worked. The sun climbed. The heat pressed down. After he died, Crane came to the house, brought papers, said my father owed back taxes on the water rights, said if I signed, the territory would give me an orphan's relief claim, money to start over somewhere else. She drove another nail. "I was 16. My mother died when I was 6. I had nobody. And I could not read. She said that last part flat. No shame, no apology, just a fact, laid down on the table like a card in a game she had already lost. I signed the paper, and then I disappeared for 8 years. Ethan waited. He expected more. She gave him nothing. You do not need to know the part in between, she said. I was there. I got out. That is enough for now. It was not enough. Both of them knew it. But Ethan had learned in the past 3 days that pushing Savannah was like pushing a wall. You could lean on it all day and the wall would not move, and all you would have at the end was a sore shoulder and the wall's contempt. After the signing, she continued, I was in the canyon for 2 years. I escaped when I was 18. Stole a horse, rode 3 days north into the Catalinas. Lived there since. 6 years. 6 years. Alone. She pulled the wire. It sang in the hot air. Not the kind of alone you are thinking of. Not lonely or romantic or brave. Hungry alone. Thirsty alone. Talking to myself so I would not forget how words work alone. Waking up in the middle of the night because a javelina knocked over my food cache, and that was the only food I had for the next 4 days alone. She straightened up, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. That is who I am. That is what your guest is. A woman who cannot read a contract but can skin a deer in 8 minutes. A woman who has not slept in a bed in 6 years. A woman whose horse keeps coming back to your gate because that horse is smarter than me and knows when a place is safe before I do. Ethan set down his hammer. He looked at his ranch. 80 head, banknote, 1 old hand. He wanted to say, we will fight. He wanted to say, I will protect you. But the words died on his tongue because they were lies. He was not strong enough to fight Silas Crane. Not with what he had. Not with what he was. Instead, he said the only honest thing he could find. You can stay. Not because I'm going to save you. Because this is my ranch, and I decide who walks through my gate. Savannah looked at him. The calculation was back. The reading of contracts. The search for hidden clauses. What do you get, she said. A person who knows cattle. This ranch is dying. I need hands. That is the truth of it. She studied him. She studied him the way she studied everything, with the exhaustive attention of someone for whom a missed detail could mean the difference between survival and the canyon. All right, she said. I will work. But I am not property. I am not charity. I earn my keep or I leave. Fair enough. They went back to the fence. The sun moved. The shadows shortened and then lengthened. They worked in silence, and the silence was different now. Not the silence of strangers. The silence of 2 people who had struck a deal and were deciding, separately, whether it would hold. That evening, Savannah was alone in the house. Ethan and Holt were in the south pasture trying to fix a break in the water line. She stood in the kitchen drinking water, and her eyes drifted to the wall. The map. It was hand-drawn, pinned to the wall above the kitchen table. A woman's hand, neat and precise, had drawn every feature of the Callaway Ranch and the surrounding territory. Every spring, every seep, every wash and ridge and fence line, dates in the margins, notes in small handwriting. Ruth had drawn this map. Savannah could tell because the handwriting matched the name written on the cookbook on the shelf, Ruth Callaway. And because the map had the quality of something made with love, every line careful, every detail placed with the attention of a woman who had looked at this land and seen not just what it was, but what it could be. Savannah studied the map. She found the eastern boundary of the Callaway Ranch. She found, marked clearly in Ruth's handwriting, the property beside it. Reed property, 160 acres, with a note in small letters beside it. Good water, good people. Ruth had known her father. And then Savannah saw the rest. The way the Callaway Ranch wrapped around the eastern boundary. The way the water lines ran. The way every creek and spring on Callaway land fed from one direction. East. From the Reed property. From her father's 160 acres. From the water Crane had taken with a piece of paper and a 16-year-old girl's signature. If Crane controlled that water, and he did, then Ethan Calloway's cattle would die before October. The banknote would come due. The ranch would fold. And Crane would buy it at auction, the way he bought everything else, cheap, legal, and with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been doing this for 20 years. Ethan's ranch did not just border her father's land. It depended on it. She was standing at the map when Ethan came in. He saw her. He saw where she was looking, and the expression on his face told her everything she needed to know before she said a single word. "Your ranch needs my father's water," she said. "That is why you are helping me." She said it quiet, not an accusation. Worse, a conclusion. Ethan stood in the doorway. He did not deny it. He could not. Because the thing she had said was partially true, and the partial truth of it was worse than a complete lie, because a complete lie can be dismissed. But a partial truth has to be held, examined, weighed, and the weight of it is in the part you cannot explain. "Would I have helped you without the water?" he said. "I want to say yes, but I do not know, and I will not lie to you." Savannah looked at him. A long time. The copper-green eyes doing their work, reading the contract, searching for the hidden clause. "That is the first honest thing a man has said to me in 8 years," she said. "I do not like it, but I believe it." She walked out. She slept in the barn that night. The crack that had been forming between them, the hairline fracture in the ice that might have become a thaw, froze shut. Not broken, frozen. And frozen things are more dangerous than broken things because broken things are done and frozen things are waiting. Ethan stood at Ruth's map and traced the waterline with his finger. His wife had drawn this map the year they arrived, mapping every spring and seep, and she had written in her small, neat hand beside the eastern boundary, "Reed property, good water, good people." Ruth had known Savannah's father. She had written good people beside his name. And Ethan had not known that until this moment, standing in his kitchen looking at his dead wife's handwriting, realizing that the web connecting him to the woman in his barn was older and deeper and more complicated than either of them had understood. He sat down slowly. Like a man absorbing a blow he should have seen coming. The monsoon arrived in Savannah's second week at the ranch, not rain. A wall of water falling from the sky like somebody gutted the clouds with a knife. The smell hit first petrichor, that ancient scent of dry earth drinking its first water in months, rich and deep and almost sweet, mixing with the sharp tang of creosote and the ozone snap of lightning. Then the sound. Thunder rolling through the valley like artillery, bouncing off the canyon walls, doubling back on itself until it seemed to come from every direction at once. Savannah was in the barn when it started. The rain hit the tin roof, and the sound went through her like a physical force. Not rain. Gunfire. Her body did not know the difference. Her body had learned in the canyon that loud, sudden percussive sounds meant danger, and the learning was in her bones, deeper than thought, deeper than reason. She crouched. Her hands went to her knife. Her breathing went fast and shallow. Her eyes scanned the barn for exits, for cover, for the corners where a person could hide. Then her mind caught up. Rain. It is rain. She straightened. Her hands shook. She clenched them until they stopped. Holt, who had been in the stall beside her checking the horses, glanced at her and said nothing. He had seen men come back from Shiloh who could not hear a door slam without dropping to the floor. He knew what he was looking at. He said nothing because there was nothing to say. The wash went first. 20 minutes of rain, and the South Wash, which had been dry as bone for 3 months, became a river. Brown water carrying rocks and brush and anything else that had been fool enough to sit in its path. The sound of it was a roar, low and constant, the sound of the land drinking too fast and choking on it. Ethan came out of the house at a run. 3 head of cattle, he shouted over the rain. They are in the South Wash. The water is moving them toward the arroyo. He and Savannah ran. It was the first time they had moved together toward the same thing instead of away from each other, and the difference was immediate and surprising. They worked. Not as strangers, not as 2 people with a frozen thing between them. but as two people who knew cattle and knew weather, and knew that when the water comes, you do not have time for the luxury of mistrust. Savannah read the herd better than Ethan. She saw the way the cattle shifted before they shifted, the way their ears turned, the way the led cow moved. She cut left when Ethan was still reading the ground. She was already at the wash bank when he arrived, knee-deep in brown water, shoving a terrified steer away from the current with her shoulder. Ethan knew the terrain. He knew where the wash narrowed, where the water would speed up, where the bank was solid enough to climb. He directed, she moved. They did not talk. They communicated in gestures, eye contact, shouts that were more sound than word, the language of people working at the edge of disaster. They lost 3 head. The water took them. Savannah stood on the wash bank and watched them go, dark shapes rolling in the brown current, and her face was hard and still, and she said nothing. Then it happened. She was at the edge of the flooded wash, reaching for a calf that had gotten stuck in the mud, and the bank gave way. Her feet went out from under her. She slid toward the water. The current was strong enough to take a horse. It would have taken her. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulled. Her body came up out of the mud, but her other hand came up too, and in it was the knife. Reflex. Pure, animal reflex. She did not decide to draw it. Her body decided. The body that had learned in the canyon that when a hand grabs you, you cut it. They were face to face. Rain pouring over both of them. Mud to the waist. His hand on her wrist. Her knife 2 inches from his forearm. Ethan looked at the blade. He did not let go. "Stab me or stand up," he said. "Pick one." She stood up. She put the knife away. She did not apologize. He did not ask her to. They stood in the rain, breathing hard, and something happened between them that was not a word and not a look and not a touch. It was a decision made simultaneously in the way that 2 people who have just survived something together decide without speaking that the thing they survived has changed the terms. The frozen thing between them did not thaw, but it held weight. It bore the load of 2 people standing in the mud, and it did not crack. After the storm, Roja came back, wet, mane matted flat against her neck, mud to the knees. But back. She walked to the gate and stood there, and Savannah went to her and put her face against the horse's neck and laughed. Not a happy laugh. The laugh of relief. The laugh that comes when the one thing you have in the world is still alive and still coming back. Ethan heard it from across the yard. He had never heard her laugh. It was a rough sound, unpracticed, like a gate that had not been opened in years. And it did something to him that he was not ready for, and did not know how to name. They spent the afternoon checking damage. The South Wash had carved new channels. Fence posts were down. The water tank was full for the first time in months, which was the monsoon's gift, the one thing it gave back for everything it took. They rode the south pasture together, quiet, working. And then Savannah stopped. Ethan saw it, the way her body locked. The way her horse, a borrowed mare from the ranch string, felt the change and went still underneath her. The way her eyes changed from the woman who had been working beside him all day to someone else. Someone older. Someone from before. She was looking at the wash bank. The flood had carved deep into the earth, pulling back layers of soil and rock and exposing what was underneath. She stared at it. She stared at it for a long time. "There is something under this ground," she said. "What do you mean?" She did not answer immediately. Her hands were tight on the reins, her knuckles were white. "I have known since I got here," she said. Her voice was flat. "I recognized this ground the first time I rode the south pasture. I knew what was buried here. I said nothing because saying it meant going back in my mind. I was not ready. Savannah, what is under the ground?" She looked at the wash bank where the flood had already begun to eat the soil away. The water was going to find them anyway. In days, maybe hours, the rain would carve deep enough to expose what was there. And when it came out without her testimony, it would be bones. anonymous, without names, without witness. With her testimony, the bones had names. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And then I need to tell your deputy. And I need you to understand that I'm telling you because the water is going to find them anyway, and they deserve to be found by someone who knows who they were." She dismounted, walked to the washbank, pointed. "Dig here. Not deep. 3 feet, maybe 4. Ethan dug. The soil was wet from the flood, soft and heavy. He used the trenching tool from his saddle pack. He went 2 feet, 2.5, and then the blade struck something that was not rock and not root, and not anything else that belonged in the ground. Bone, white against the red earth. A curve of rib, a fragment of something longer. Human. Ethan went white. He stepped back. He looked at Savannah. She stood at the edge of the hole. Her face was a mask, not angry, not sad, not afraid. A mask. The face of a woman who had been carrying this weight for 6 years and had just set it down and did not know whether the relief or the grief was going to hit first. "That is not all of them," she said. "I know at least 7, and I know their names. The storm did not just take cattle, it took the dirt. And the dirt in this territory kept secrets longer than people did." Savannah did not want to go to the burial ground. Every step toward it was a step backward into the canyon. But she was the only person alive who could give those bones their names. So she went. Fuentes came the next morning. Ethan had ridden to town before dawn and found the deputy at his boarding house still dressing, and told him what was in the wash bank in sentences that were short and hard and left no room for questions. Fuentes listened. His face went through several changes. Then he put on his badge and his hat and rode out without telling anyone where he was going. Marta Torres came, because Marta Torres always came when something needed doing. She was 43 years old, built like rawhide, a widow who ran her dead husband's cattle operation alone because nobody else would do it, and she would be damned before she let it die. Crane had dammed the creek that fed her grazing land last spring. Half her herd died. She did not file a complaint. She sharpened her knives and waited. When Ethan sent word that he needed people he could trust, she saddled her horse and rode. She brought her horse, a gray mare named Ceniza that she had ridden for 12 years, since Miguel was alive, since before the cancer and the creek and the slow theft of everything she had built. Ceniza was the last thing in her life that connected her to the woman she had been before Crane, and she rode that horse the way some people hold a rosary, with the grip of faith and habit and the refusal to let go. The 4 of them stood at the washbank in the morning light, Fuentes with his badge and his notebook, Marta with her silence and her steady hands, Ethan with his rifle and his fear, and Savannah, who stood at the edge of the excavation and looked down at the bones the way a person looks at a door they swore they would never open again. The remains were emerging from the earth. The flood had done most of the work. White bone against red soil, a scrap of fabric that was once a dress faded to nothing, a shoe, a ring. Savannah saw the ring and her body went rigid. She knelt. She reached into the earth and picked it up, turned it in her fingers. It was thin, silver or tin, with a small stone that might have been glass or might have been something more. She held it up to the light. "Ada Prescott," she said. Her voice was steady and dead. "She wore this ring every day. She said her mother gave it to her when she was 12. She disappeared the second year I was in the canyon. They told us she ran away. They always said people ran away. Nobody ran away." Fuentes was writing. His hand moved fast. His face was the color of the bone in the dirt. "Can you identify the others?" he asked. "Not from remains, but I know where they are. I know how many. I know their names." Savannah stood up. She looked at Fuentes. "Not at Ethan. At Fuentes. At the badge. I need to tell you what happened in Devil's Canyon," she said. "I am going to tell you, not him." She glanced at Ethan. "No offense." "None taken," Ethan said, but his voice was tight. I am not telling you this so you will feel sorry for me, she said to Fuentes. I am telling you so you will do your job. You carry a badge. That badge is supposed to mean something. I need it to mean something right now. Can it? Fuentes looked at his badge, then at the bones, then at Savannah. Yes, ma'am, he said. It can. They sat apart. Fuentes and Savannah at the washbank, speaking in low voices. Ethan and Marta by the horses, far enough away that the words were indistinct. Savannah spoke the way a witness gives testimony. Dates, names, locations, the number of people she had seen brought into the canyon, the conditions, the work, the punishments, the names of the guards, the name of the man who ran them, Jack Drummond. The stone building at the back of the canyon where Crane kept his records. The mine shaft where people were held. She spoke for over an hour. Fuentes filled 20 pages of his notebook. His hand shook by the end, but his writing stayed legible because legibility was the one thing he could control in a situation where everything else was falling apart. Ethan stood by the horses and heard fragments, enough to piece together the shape of the thing, if not the details. Enough to understand what had happened to Savannah between the ages of 16 and 18. Enough to understand why she slept with a knife and counted biscuits and flinched when a hand reached for her. He wanted to go to her. He wanted to say something. He wanted to do what he always did, fix it, hold it, make it smaller. He did not. Because she had chosen to tell Fuentes instead of him, and that choice was not an accident. She had told him directly when he asked why. You would want to fix it. I do not need fixing. I need someone to write it down. And Ethan realized, standing there with his rifle and his useless good intentions, that there were parts of Savannah he would never be allowed to touch. Not her body, not her history, not the canyon. Those belonged to her. The testimony belonged to the badge. And the only thing that belonged to him was the space he made for her to be exactly who she was, without asking her to be anything else. That was hard. Harder than fighting. Harder than the 19-year-old boy in the dark. Because doing nothing when you want to do everything is the most unnatural act a person with a savior's heart can perform. When Savannah finished, she stood and walked to where Marta was standing by the horses. Marta had been still the entire time, watching, listening to what she could hear, filling in the rest with the intelligence of a woman who had lived in Crane's shadow long enough to know its shape. Savannah stopped in front of her. I need help, she said. The words came out like they had been pried loose with a crowbar. Name it, Marta said. I need to go into the canyon. Crane keeps the land deeds in his office. My father's deed. The real one. The one that shows his signature, not the one Crane forged. Without that paper, I have bones and testimony. That is not nothing, but it is not enough. A court needs documents. Crane has them. Marta looked at her, steady, dark eyes. The eyes of a woman who had lost everything that could be lost and was still standing. When? Soon. Before Crane knows what we have found. Marta nodded. Then I am going. You do not have to. I know I do not have to. I want to. My husband's name is in that office too. His deed. His signature. Crane forged Miguel's name 6 months before he died. I want that paper. I want to hold it in my hands and know that the last lie Crane told about my husband is over. Savannah looked at her. Something passed between them that Ethan, standing 10 feet away, could see, but could not hear. The recognition of women who had been ground down by the same machine and refused to stay flat. Then Savannah turned to Ethan. She looked at him for the first time since the testimony. You want to go to Tucson, she said. Alert the territorial marshal. I know. That is the right move. If you leave this ranch, Crane burns it before you reach Tucson. Ethan knew she was right. He hated it. Because being right meant what came next. And what came next was the canyon. Then what do you want, he said. I want my father's land papers. They are in the canyon. Without them, it is bones and my word. You think a court believes a landowner or a wild woman? She said wild woman the way someone says a word they have been called so many times it has lost its sting and become a fact. like a scar you stop noticing. Ethan looked at the mountains, at the wash bank with the bones still showing through the mud, at Savannah standing in the sun with her chin up and her hands steady, and the weight of 7 names on her back. He was afraid, genuinely afraid. Not of Crane, not of Drummond, not of the canyon. Afraid of himself, of what he might do in the dark with a rifle in his hands and a man in front of him. He had killed once, the boy, the skinny boy who was just hungry, and the killing had cracked something in Ethan that he had spent 2 years trying to seal shut, and he was not certain the seal would hold. "All right," he said, "we go." Fuente spoke up. He had been quiet, listening, notebook closed. "Eliza Crane is on her way back from San Francisco," he said. "Crane called her home, I do not know why. But Crane has never called his daughter home unless he's preparing for something big." Savannah looked at him. "Who is Eliza Crane?" "His daughter. 19. Been at school in San Francisco for 3 years. Something flickered across Savannah's face. A calculation she had not made before. A piece on the board she had not accounted for. She filed it. The way she filed everything. That night, for the first time since she had arrived at the ranch, Savannah sat on the porch instead of in the barn. The night was cool after the rain, the air washed clean, the stars coming out between the last clouds of the storm. She sat on the step and looked at the mountains, and listened to the coyotes and the wind and the sound of Roja shifting in the corral. Ethan came out. He sat beside her. Not close, not touching. On the same step with space between them. Neither spoke for 20 minutes. The silence was not awkward. It was the silence of 2 people who have run out of the kind of words that fill space and are waiting for the kind of words that mean something. "Are you scared?" Savannah said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Good. I do not trust people who are not scared." The distance between them narrowed, not physically. Neither moved, but something in the air shifted, the way the air shifts before a second storm, and the shift was this. They were sharing the same fear, and sharing fear, Savannah had learned over 8 years of solitary survival, was the closest thread between 2 strangers. Closer than trust, closer than affection, closer than anything except the bone-deep knowledge that the person beside you is looking at the same darkness and has not run. She did not touch him. He did not touch her. They sat on the porch and looked at the mountains, and the fear sat between them like a third person, quiet and patient, waiting to see what they would do with it. They went in on a moonless night, 3 of them. Savannah leading, Ethan carrying the rifle, Marta Torres carrying an empty saddlebag for evidence. Fuentes stayed in town. If they were not back by dawn, he would ride for Tucson. That was the second plan. There was no third plan. The back trail started at the base of the mesa where the rock dropped off and the land folded in on itself like a fist. Savannah found the trailhead by memory and by feel, running her hands along the rock face until she found the gap. It was narrow, barely wider than a man's shoulders, the kind of passage that existed because water had carved it 1,000 years ago and human beings had been stubborn enough to follow. They left the horses tied at the base and went on foot, single file. Savannah first. The darkness inside the gap was total, not the darkness of night, which has stars and moon and the ambient glow of the sky, the darkness of stone, the darkness of being underground. Savannah moved through it by touch, her palms flat against the rock walls, her feet finding each step before committing her weight. She had come this way once before, running, terrified, 18 years old, and bleeding from a cut on her arm where she had torn it on the barbed wire at the canyon mouth. She had run through this darkness without stopping, without thinking, and her body had memorized every inch of it the way a body memorizes pain. Behind her, Ethan moved carefully. He could hear Marta behind him, her breathing controlled and even. He could hear the drip of water somewhere deep in the rock. He could hear his own heartbeat. The walls were close enough to touch on both sides. The air smelled of bats and mineral and the cold that lives inside stone, a cold that has nothing to do with weather and everything to do with depth. Savannah stopped. Her hand went up, a signal that Ethan felt more than saw. She was shaking, not trembling, not the delicate shiver of cold or nerves, but shaking. Full body. Her hand against the rock wall was vibrating. Ethan did not say you are strong. He did not say it is all right. He waited. Savannah's breathing was fast, then slow, then fast again. The rock under her hand was familiar. Her palm knew this surface, this exact ledge, this specific crack where the stone split and you had to step left. Her body remembered the canyon before her mind decided whether to be brave or afraid. Her feet knew the way even while her mind was screaming to turn back. She went forward, not because the fear stopped, because the feet moved. They came out of the gap and into the canyon. It was smaller than Ethan had imagined. Not the vast operation of a cattle baron, not the sprawling empire the rumors suggested. A cluster of buildings, maybe 6, set against the back wall of a box canyon. A main house, a bunkhouse, a cookhouse, and at the back, a stone building that was smaller than the others and had a door that was heavier. Crane's office. The canyon looked legitimate on the surface. A cattle operation, corrals, a chute, a water system fed by the creek that Crane had dammed upstream. Nothing that a passing rider would question. But behind the main buildings, cut into the back wall of the canyon, was the mine shaft. An old copper working abandoned years ago, now repurposed. Savannah could see the timber framing of the entrance, the rails that once carried ore carts, the darkness inside that she knew from memory and from nightmares. 8 to 10 people in there, she whispered. Last time I knew. Could be more. Could be fewer. Ethan looked at the mine entrance. His stomach turned. We get the papers, she said. That is what we came for. The papers come first. The marshal can come back for the people. We cannot carry them out through that trail. They need the main entrance. They need men with badges. She was right. He knew she was right. But the knowledge that there were people in that mine shaft right now while he stood in the dark with a rifle and a plan that did not include them sat in his chest like a stone. They moved. Savannah led them along the canyon wall in the shadow where the moonlight did not reach to the back building. Crane's office. The door was locked, a standard padlock, not the iron fortress Ethan had imagined. Marta stepped forward. She pulled 2 thin pieces of metal from her vest pocket. She worked the lock with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had done this before and preferred not to explain where she had learned. My husband asked me once where I learned that, Marta whispered. I told him not to ask. The lock clicked. The door opened. Inside, the office was small and orderly. A desk, a chair, a shelf of ledgers, a strongbox against the back wall open, as if Crane did not believe anyone would ever enter this room uninvited. Inside the strongbox, land deeds, dozens of them. Names Savannah recognized and names she did not. Signatures real and forged, claims backdated and witness-signed by men who had never met the people whose land they were stealing. She found her father's deed. Thomas Reed, 160 acres, water rights clearly documented. Her father's signature at the bottom, real, in the careful hand of a man who had learned to write late and valued every letter. Beneath it, the forged version. Same property, different signature, dated after his death. Crane's handwriting, neat and cold. Savannah put both documents in the saddlebag. Her hands were steady now, steadier than they had been in weeks. Some things settle when you stop running and start taking. Marta found her husband's deed, Miguel Torres. She held it up to the thin moonlight coming through the window and looked at Miguel's signature, the real one, and her jaw tightened and she folded it carefully and put it inside her shirt, against her chest, and she did not say a word. Then Savannah found the letters. They were in the desk drawer. A bundle of them, tied with string, written on good paper, in a hand that was young and precise and angry. The return address was San Francisco. The name was Eliza Crane. Savannah read the first letter, then the second, then the third. By the fourth, her hands were shaking again, but not from fear. Listen to this, she whispered. She read aloud, barely above a breath. I have found an attorney. I know what the canyon is. I know what you have done. I am coming home, but not to help you. She looked at Ethan. He looked back. She is coming to bring him down, Savannah said. His own daughter. She knows. The letters went back 3 years. Eliza Crane had spent 3 years in San Francisco, learning, growing, reading newspapers, asking questions, hiring a lawyer. She had pieced together what her father was from a distance, the way you can see the shape of a mountain only when you are far enough away from it. And she had decided, alone and in writing, to come home and end it. Crane had called her home not because he wanted her near, because he knew. He had read her letters or intercepted them or been told by someone, and he knew his daughter was coming for him, and he wanted her where he could see her, where he could control her, where he could do what he had always done to people who threatened him. But Eliza was not people. She was his daughter, and that, Savannah understood, was the crack in the wall that no amount of money or violence could seal. They loaded the saddlebag. Deeds, ledgers, letters, enough evidence to bury Crane in a territorial court and keep him buried. Savannah was closing the strongbox when she heard it. Boot falls, 1 pair, steady, not hurried. Coming toward the office door, Marta drew a knife. Ethan raised the rifle. Savannah stepped behind the door. The door opened. A man stood in the frame. Tall, lean, wearing a hat that shadowed his face. Drummond. Jack Drummond. Crane's enforcer. The man who tracked people the way a wolf tracks deer, patient and thorough and without remorse. He looked at Marta with her knife. He looked at Ethan with his rifle. He looked at the saddlebag full of papers in Marta's hand. Then he looked at Savannah. 10 seconds of silence. The longest 10 seconds of Savannah's life. She counted them the way she counted biscuits, automatically, because counting was control and control was survival. Drummond's hand was near his holster, but not on it. His eyes moved from Savannah to the saddlebag to the open strongbox and back to Savannah. Then he stepped aside. He did not speak. He did not draw. He did not turn around. He simply moved his body from the doorway to the wall and left the path open, the way a man steps out of a doorway to let someone pass. An ordinary gesture, except that there was nothing ordinary about Jack Drummond doing it. Savannah remembered the barn, the night Roja's reins were cut. Drummond had been in that barn, feet from where she slept, and he had taken only the horse. He could have taken her, he chose not to. He had been stepping aside for weeks, he had just stopped hiding it. Drummond did not get a redemption. He was not switching sides, he was not having a change of heart. He was tired. 20 years of doing one man's violence had worn the purpose out of him the way water wears stone, slowly and completely, until there is nothing left but a smooth surface and the memory of what used to be sharp. Sometimes people do not transform. They simply stop. They passed him. Single file. Out the door, along the canyon wall, back to the gap. Savannah went first. Marta second. Ethan last, walking backward with the rifle raised, watching Drummond watch them go. Drummond did not follow. He stood in the doorway of Crane's office and watched them disappear into the dark. And then he went inside and closed the door and sat in Crane's chair. And if he thought about what he had just done or why, he did not have to tell anyone. Some choices are private. Some roads out are walked alone. They made it through the gap and out to the horses. The sky was lightening. Dawn was coming, pink at the eastern edge, the way it does in the desert. Fast and without warning. They mounted up. Savannah was in front, the saddlebag across her lap. And for the first time since she had entered the canyon, she took a full breath. Her lungs expanded. Her shoulders dropped. Something in her chest unlocked. A door she had been holding shut for 6 years. Then she looked south, toward the ranch. And she saw the smoke. A column of black against the pink sky, rising from the exact place where Ethan Calloway's barn used to stand. Crane had not waited. Ethan rode hard for the ranch, and the first thing he looked for was not the fire. It was Holt. He found the old man sitting against a mesquite trunk in the yard, blood running from a gash above his right eye, his shotgun still in his hands. Holt looked up when Ethan dismounted, and his expression was the expression of a man who was angry at himself for being old and slow and alive. "Two of them," Holt said, "set the barn and ran. I hit one, but they were faster than me. Most things are these days. The barn was gone, not burning, gone." The frame stood, blackened ribs against the sky still smoking. The roof had collapsed. The hay stores, 3 months of cutting and curing and stacking, were ash. The tack room was destroyed. Saddles, bridles, rope, tools, all of it. The horses were safe because Holt had gotten them out, dragging himself from the mesquite where the blow had knocked him to the barn doors and throwing them open and letting the animals scatter into the pasture before the roof came down. The economic damage was not symbolic. It was arithmetic. With the bank note due in 8 weeks and the hay reserve destroyed, the ranch was now operating on margins that did not exist. They would have to buy hay from neighbors if neighbors would sell, and the money for hay was money that should have gone to the bank, and the money for the bank was money that did not exist. The ranch was not dying anymore. It was dead. The body just had not stopped moving yet. Ethan stood in the yard and looked at the ruins, and the arithmetic ran through his head, and the numbers were all wrong, and there was no way to make them right. Savannah was beside him. Marta was seeing to Holt, cleaning the wound, wrapping his head with strips from her own shirt. The saddlebag full of evidence sat on the ground between them, heavy with deeds and ledgers, and the letters of a daughter who was coming to destroy her father. And none of it mattered right now because the barn was ash and the ranch was finished. Ethan said the wrong thing. He said it because he was exhausted and afraid, and the smoke was still burning his eyes and his hands were shaking, and the ruins of the barn looked exactly like the ruins of everything he had built with Ruth, which was the last thing she had touched, which was the last place he could go to feel her presence. He said it because grief makes people stupid, and anger makes people cruel, and he was both. "If you were not here," he said, "my barn would still be standing. If you were not here, Crane would have no reason to touch this ranch." He knew it was unfair the moment the words left his mouth. He knew it the way you know a bullet has left the rifle, by the recoil, by the sound, by the sudden sick understanding that the thing you sent into the world cannot be called back. Savannah did not yell. She did not argue. She did not flinch. She looked at him with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life, the expression of a person who is used to being blamed, who has been blamed so many times for so many things by so many people that blame has become background noise, like the wind or the heat, something you live inside rather than something that surprises you. "You are right," she said. Then she walked to the gate. She whistled for Roja. The red Mustang came from the south pasture at a trot, ears forward, and Savannah grabbed the mane and swung up without a saddle, without a word, without looking back. She turned the horse toward the mountains and she rode. Ethan watched her go. The dust rose behind her, the sun was climbing. The smoke from the barn drifted south in the morning breeze. Holt spoke from behind him. His voice was steady despite the blood on his face. "You just ran off the only person who knows the canyon, knows the papers, and knows how to survive when everything falls apart. Over a barn. Ruth would have hit you with the skillet." Ethan did not answer. He went inside. He stood in the kitchen. He looked at the whiskey bottle on the shelf. And for the first time since the boy, since the 19-year-old whose face he saw in every dark room, he picked it up. He held it. The glass was warm from the morning sun coming through the window. The amber liquid moved inside, slow and thick, and it caught the light the way it always did. Like something promising, like something that would make the numbers add up, and the barn stand again, and the woman come back. He put it down. The fact that he picked it up mattered. The fact that he put it down mattered more. But both things happened, and both were true. The next morning, Roja came back. She was at the gate at dawn, standing in the same spot she had stood every time, patient and certain, waiting for the world to do what it should. She was alone, no Savannah, just the horse. Ethan stood on the porch with his coffee and looked at the red Mustang and understood, finally, what the title of his own story was. The horse kept returning to his gate because this gate had become home, because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, Between the storms and the bones and the canyon and the barn, the instinct of this animal had decided that this place, this falling-apart ranch with its dead grass and its ashes and its broken man, was where it belonged. And the instinct of the woman who owned the horse had decided the same thing. But the woman was not the horse. The woman was complicated. The woman had been blamed, and the blame had confirmed everything she already believed about herself, and about people, and about the price of staying. The horse came back, because horses are honest. The woman stayed away, because people are not. Fuentes arrived at noon. He rode in fast, and his face had the look of a man carrying news that was both good and urgent. Eliza Crane reached Red Spur this morning, Fuentes said. She came to me before she went to her father's house. She brought a lawyer from San Francisco, a man named Whitfield, and she is prepared to testify against Crane. I have dispatched a rider to Tucson. The territorial marshal is on his way. 4 deputies. Should be here by tomorrow morning. Ethan absorbed this. The machinery was moving. The law, the real law, the kind that comes from Tucson with badges and warrants and the authority of the territory behind it, was on its way. The evidence from the canyon, the deeds and ledgers and letters, would be in the hands of men who could use it. But Savannah was in the mountains, alone. And if Crane learned she was alone, Drummond's patience would have a limit. I need to find her, Ethan said. Fuentes looked at the gate where Roja stood. Looks like her horse already knows where she is. Ethan saddled up. Roja fell in beside his horse without being led, trotting ahead as they reached the foothills, finding the trail by memory and instinct. In his saddlebag, Ethan carried the original deed to Thomas Reed's land. Not a gift, not a peace offering. The thing that had always been hers, that he should have given her before he said anything else. Ethan found her at the rock overhang, same place as the first time, like a circle closing, or maybe like a circle opening depending on which direction you were facing. She was sitting with her back against the stone, looking down at the valley below. From up here, his ranch was a small, dark shape against the brown of the desert. The burned barn was a smudge. The pastures were green from the monsoon, the first green in months, and from this height, the land looked almost healthy. You had to be down in it to see the damage. Roja stood beside her, grazing on the scrub grass that grew in the shade of the overhang. The horse looked up when Ethan approached and went back to eating, unconcerned, because Roja had decided that this man was safe, and the horse's judgment was better than most people's. Savannah heard him coming. She did not turn around. If you brought rope, she said, I will push you off this cliff. I brought your father's land deed. Silence. A long silence. The kind that has weight and texture and the sound of a woman deciding something. She turned around. Ethan dismounted. He did not walk to her. He stood by his horse 10 feet away, the same distance he had kept the first time he found her here. The same space he had learned to give. He pulled the deed from his saddlebag and held it up. She could see it from where she sat. The paper, yellowed at the edges, the handwriting, the signature at the bottom that she had not seen since she was 16 years old. She stood up, walked to him, took the paper from his hand. Their fingers did not touch. She read it, slowly, carefully, the way a person reads who taught herself to read alone in the mountains over 6 years, sounding out the difficult words in her head, moving her lips slightly on the legal terms. She found her father's signature, Thomas Reed, written in the careful hand of a man who had learned to write late and valued every letter. Her eyes went wet. She blinked. She did not cry. She folded the paper and put it in the pocket of her vest, the one closest to her chest. Ethan spoke. I blamed you because I was scared, he said. Scared of losing the ranch. Scared of losing the last thing Ruth touched. That is my fear, not your fault. And I am sorry. Not sorry with a reason after it. Just sorry. Savannah looked at him, the copper-green eyes doing their work, reading the contract one more time. You were not completely wrong, she said. I brought danger to your ranch. That is a fact. And I left because that is what I know how to do. Run. I am better at running than anything else. But Roja keeps coming back to your gate. Roja is a horse. Horses go back to water and grass. Then you can come back for reasons that simple. Does not have to be anything grand. She almost smiled. Almost. Distant sounds from the valley, not thunder. Gunshots. From the direction of Red Spur, not the ranch. Both of them turned, looked down, could see nothing from this height, but the sounds were unmistakable. They mounted and rode down. They reached Red Spur in the late afternoon. The territorial marshal had arrived from Tucson with 4 deputies, hard men on hard horses who looked like they had ridden through the night and would ride through another one if the situation required it. The main street was full of people. More people than Ethan had ever seen in Red Spur, ranchers and townspeople and women with children on their hips, all watching the same thing. Silas Crane's house, at the end of the street. A 2-story adobe with a wide porch and a garden that his wife had planted before she died, and that Crane had maintained ever since. The only soft thing the man had ever kept alive. Crane was on the porch, sitting, alone. His rifle was across his knees, but not raised. He was not barricaded. He was not raging. He was sitting in his chair, the same chair he sat in every evening, looking at the street the way he had always looked at the street, with the calm assessment of a man who controlled everything he saw. But today the street was full of men with badges, and his daughter was standing near the marshal's horses on the other side, and the calm in his eyes was the calm of a man who knows it is over and is deciding how to end it. The marshal called out, "Silas Crane, I have a warrant for your arrest issued by the territorial court in Tucson. You are charged with land fraud, document forgery, false imprisonment, and accessory to wrongful death. Surrender your weapon and step down from the porch." Crane did not move. He looked at the marshal. He looked at the deputies. He looked at the crowd. Then he looked at Eliza. She was 19. Dark hair like her mother. The same pale blue eyes as Crane, but warmer. Or maybe just younger, not yet frozen by the things that had frozen her father's. She stood straight. She did not flinch from his gaze. Crane spoke to her. Not to the marshal, not to the crowd, to his daughter. His voice was not a shout. It was conversational. The voice of a father talking to a child. "You are just like your mother," he said. "She could never forgive me either." Eliza's voice shook, but her feet did not move. "Mama could not forgive you because she knew who you were before you did." Crane looked at his daughter for a long time, the pale blue eyes holding the pale blue eyes. A mirror, a generation, a legacy of dirt and water and the things men do to own them. He set the rifle on the porch boards. He stood up. He held his wrists out for the marshal. No resistance, no screaming, no threats. Just the quiet of a man who has lost the only thing he could not replace with money or violence, and knew it, and was too tired to pretend otherwise. The marshal cuffed him. The deputies led him down the porch steps. The crowd parted. Crane walked past Savannah. He stopped. The marshals tried to move him. He planted his feet, just for a moment. He looked at her. He did not speak. She did not speak. He looked at her the way a man looks at the thing that ended him, with something that was not quite hate, and not quite respect, and not quite recognition. Just a look. Then the marshals moved him forward, and Savannah stepped aside to let him pass. She did not block his path. She did not spit. She did not deliver a speech. She did not need him to know she had won. She just needed him to go. The same gesture Drummond had made in the canyon, the gesture of someone who is done, not with anger, not with grief. Done with the man himself. He no longer took up space in her. She stepped aside. He walked past. And then he was gone, loaded into the marshal's wagon, headed for the territorial prison at Yuma to await trial. Sheriff Bragg was arrested that evening on charges of conspiracy and corruption. 3 of Crane's hired men scattered into the territory because not all villains are caught, and honest stories do not pretend otherwise. The days after moved fast and slow at the same time. 3 of the 8 people held in the canyon mine shaft had died before the marshals reached them. Not everyone was saved. Savannah heard the number and went to the barn on Marta's ranch, where she was staying while the legal process ground forward, and she sat in the hay and pressed her hands against her face and breathed. And when she came out an hour later, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. 7 remains were found at the Washbank burial site. 3 would eventually be identified, 4 would not. There would be families who never received answers. That was the cost, and the story was honest about it. And Savannah would carry the weight of the 3 she could not save alongside the weight of the 7 she could name. And both weights would stay with her because some burdens are not meant to be set down. They are meant to be carried well. Marta Torres lost her horse during the canyon ride. Ceniza, the gray mare she had ridden for 12 years, spooked during the extraction and bolted into the canyon dark. They found her 3 days later, lame, with a shattered foreleg. The merciful thing was done. Marta stood beside the mare and put her hand on the gray neck and said nothing. Then she walked home. 12 miles. She did not accept a ride. Some grief is walked, not carried. Autumn came. The ranch still carried debt. The barn was half rebuilt, new timber rising from the ashes, the frame taking shape in the cool October light. Ethan and Holt worked on it every day, and sometimes Fuentes came out on his day off and brought his tools, and sometimes Miller from the next ranch over sent his boys to help because that was how it worked in the territory. Your barn burned, your neighbors came. You did the same when their barn burned, and the cycle continued, imperfect and slow and held together by the understanding that no one survives alone. The monsoon had saved the grass, the cattle had feed, and Savannah's 160 acres of water, restored to her by territorial court order, meant the ranch would survive the winter. The bank received a partial payment and an extension, granted because the banker was a practical man who understood that a ranch with water was worth waiting for. Savannah did not stay at Ethan's ranch, not in the way the word stay implies. She did not move into his house or his bed or his life. She went to her father's land, her 160 acres. She cleared the old homestead, which had been empty for 8 years, and looked it. She repaired the roof. She rebuilt the corral. She hung a gate between her property and Ethan's, a gate that could be locked from her side. Her own dirt, her own roof, her name on a paper she could read. The night before the morning that would become the last scene of this story, Savannah walked alone to her father's water source. The spring came up through the rock at the eastern edge of the property, clear and cold, running into a small pool that overflowed into a creek that fed the pasture. It had been running for 8 years without her. It had been running when she was in the canyon. It had been running when she was in the mountains. It had been running when she was counting biscuits and sleeping with a knife and pressing on wounds to test if people would break. The water did not care about any of that. The water ran because that was what water did. It found the low place and filled it and moved on. Savannah knelt at the spring. She put her hand in the water. It was cold, clean, the same water her father had drunk, the same water that had fed his horses, the same water Crane had wanted badly enough to kill for. She said 3 words, to no one, to the water, to her father. "I came back, Daddy." Then she stood. She walked to the gate between her property and Ethan's, and she locked it, not to lock Ethan out, to own the lock, to have a gate, to have a key, to have the right to choose who came through and who did not. For 8 years she had been locked in and locked out by other people's decisions, cages and canyons and contracts she could not read. Now she had a lock that was hers, a gate that was hers, a choice that was hers. She went to bed. She slept. Without a knife. For the first time since she was 16 years old, she slept without a weapon within reach. And if she woke once in the night and reached for it and found nothing and lay in the dark for a few minutes with her heart hammering, well, that was the price. And the price would get smaller over time. And time was something she finally had. Morning. Savannah stood at her gate with coffee in her hand. She had made it herself. It was bitter and strong and perfect. Roja stood beside her, grazing on the new grass that had come up after the monsoon, the green bright and impossible against the brown of the desert. From Ethan's ranch, a figure appeared, walking, not on horseback, on foot, slow, ordinary, carrying something in one hand. He walked across the pasture and through the open gate between the two properties and up the rise to where Savannah stood. He was carrying a hammer. "Your barn does not have a roof yet," he said. "Neither does yours." "Which one first?" "Mine." He laughed. She almost laughed. The almost was closer than it used to be. Every day it got a little closer. That was how healing worked out here. Not sudden, not dramatic. The slow accumulation of almost until one day the almost fell away, and the thing underneath was real. He walked past her to the barn. She followed. They worked. The sound of hammers filled the morning, echoing off the mountains the way sound does in the desert, carrying farther than it should, reaching places it was not aimed at. Roja watched them for a while. Then the horse turned and walked through the open gate onto Ethan's land, found a patch of grass she liked, and began to eat. Then she walked back through the gate onto Savannah's land and found another patch and ate that too. Then she stood in the middle of the gateway, half on one property and half on the other, and dozed in the sun. Savannah saw it from the barn roof. She shook her head. "That horse does not know whose land she is on," she said. "That horse knows exactly whose land she is on," Ethan said. "She is on hers." Savannah looked at him. He looked at her, the copper-green eyes and the gray creek water eyes meeting in the October light. And what passed between them was not a promise and not a declaration, and not any of the words that stories usually end with. It was simpler than that. It was two people on a roof that was not finished, holding hammers, looking at each other across a gap they had been closing for weeks, one board at a time. Savannah did not say, "I love you." She said, "I need 12-foot pine beams. Do you have any?" And Ethan understood that was the closest she would come, and it was enough. Some people speak with words. Some people speak by letting you through the gate, and some people speak by letting their horse choose where to go home to. Roja chose both.